Saluton, parolas Tomaso. Hey, last week I did a video called Which Conlang would be the best international auxiliary language? And wow, what a reaction I got. One of the most overwhelming reactions was, hey, but you forgot about... So that's what we're going to talk about today. What did I leave out of my last video? What have I learned from your reactions? These sorts of things. This is the Esperanto Variety Show, where we have videos in Esperanto and about Esperanto coming out every Thursday. And going into 2019, we have tips and tricks and just information on language learning in general. If you're new to Esperanto Variety Show, please subscribe and use the bell icon so you won't miss anything. If you're not new, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. The first reaction that I got was a little bit unexpected, really. And that was in the description of the video, I said, learning a second language is kind of a pain. What I really meant by that is it's a lot of work. And if you love it, if you don't love it, it's a lot of work either way, whether you love the work or not. And that's really all I wanted to say. I agree. Learning a second language is the greatest thing in life. I learned German 30 years ago and just have been caught up with that ever since. This idea that you can learn to understand something that you've never heard before. And then I started learning Esperanto, and that opened up a new world of language learning for me. I've taken a class in French, I've taken a class in Italian. I have done a lot of self-study for some other languages. I got to the point in Japanese where I could make my own sentences. I even got conversational in Croatian. I've since forgotten a lot of those things. It just takes a lot of work to keep this stuff up. That's really what I meant. I still enjoy the process. I'm looking forward to continuing my language learning journey, but it's a lot of work if you're into it, and if you have other interests, it's still a lot of work. I've called myself a language addict, and what I mean by that is I got to the point where I would every time I would see another language, I would see a book about learning another language, I would want to start learning that language. I had gotten to the point where people would ask me, well, what languages have you tried to learn? And I couldn't remember them all, actually. It got up to like 18 languages. And even that's not enough. I remember I had an opportunity to go to a conference, and it was in Bulgaria. And I'm like, I don't speak Bulgarian, right? So then it's like, oh, do I want to start learning Bulgarian? That's the value in this dream of an auxiliary language. The reality, however, it takes a lot of coordination to get that. Esperanto has been out there for 131 years, and it's never had, and I don't think it ever will have, the so-called fina venko, where it becomes the one universal language. The fina venko is an Esperanto expression that means the final victory. And that's the hypothetical time when the whole world will speak Esperanto. What does that mean? What does that look like? I think that would be a great topic for a future video. Is it a good thing? Is it not a good thing? Is it realistic? So stay tuned for that. I just happen to have this book on Boabomu. Boabomu. I learned enough Boabomu to know how to pronounce the name of the language, and that's really about it. It's called The Simplest Universal Auxiliary Language. It was written by a guy in Japan, I believe, in the 50s, 60s, somewhere around that time. It's pretty typical of what I would consider a whole subset of auxiliary language projects, where the shape of the word describes what the word is. Don Harlow described these languages as Dewey Decimal System languages. If you understand the Dewey Decimal System, then you pretty much understand how these languages work. I just watched a video called Isaac Newton's Forgotten International Language. And what the example was, they said, just imagine that the A in apple actually meant that this is a fruit, right? So all fruit starts with A. Then you would have a word, I'm going to make it up, amama, right? Amama. You don't know what amama is, but you know it's a fruit because it starts with A. Wouldn't that be a whole lot easier to learn? What happens is a lot of the words end up sounding the same. And so you're listening in context, and you say, I'm walking down the street and I saw a bloop, and you know it's an animal, and you're thinking, okay, it could be a dog, it could be a cat, because of the shape of the word we know it's a house animal, and you misunderstand, you mishear it, you misremember, and yet both words work in the context, right? That's one of the things about language, is that there's a little bit of redundancy there. And I don't think people speak the Dewey Decimal System, so I don't have a whole lot of interest in those languages. Tokipona. that Tokipona is a toy language. It is essentially a model language, a toy language, right? It's the idea of Tokipona is that it has a limited number of words, and once this dictionary of words has been established, that's it. It's a challenge, it's a game to figure out how can I say something in Tokipona without adding words, without borrowing words, right, without coining new words. It's never meant to be a fully functional language. I got into a conversation with one person who commented on my last video, and he said, well, yeah, I think we could, Tokipona has shown us how simple a language can be. And I really think the devil will be in the details. If you try to make a Tokipona into a fully functional language, it's going to end up more or less as complicated as any other of these projects that I discussed in the previous video. And if you don't think so, why don't you give it a try? Spend some time translating things into this Tokipona-like language, which is fully expressive. And you'll see why I called it a rabbit hole. Untitled. What I like about Untitled is it demonstrates this whole category of language which is similar to Esperanto but maybe a little bit more naturalistic. There are different levels along this whole scale of things, but in the end they're really just in a lot of ways dialects of the same language. If you understand how one works, you more or less understand how the other ones work. And I've got enough questions about Untitled that I'm going to do an entire video on that coming up, so I don't want to spend a whole lot more time on that here. What it shows is that there's not a whole lot of value in splitting some of these hairs. Esperanto has shown that you can have a fully expressive language which does not have elaborate conjugations, elaborate declensions, grammatical gender, all sorts of things that make learning a national language more difficult. Some people will say, but it could be simpler. Well, yeah, it could be simpler, but I don't believe it could be 10 times simpler. I don't believe it could be twice as simple, whatever simple means. And I think that when we look at Untitled, it allows us to look at some of these other projects in a different light. So we'll have a video on that coming up. I got a couple comments on Lingua de Planeta. I seem to remember that coming up in the Auxlang list over the years when it was new. I just read up on the history of it again. I've never really been all that interested in it. Reading in Mario Pei's book, One Language for the World, he talks about all sorts of different kinds of ideas. Lingua de Planeta is just a new effort to do the same old thing. So rather than taking 1 or 2 words from each of the 6,000 languages in the world, you take 5 major languages. I'm going to say off the top of my head, Arabic, Chinese, English, French, I don't know what, Spanish I'm sure is one of the most distributed languages in the world. 20% of the vocabulary will be familiar to somebody from those 5 who speaks one of those 5 languages. In the end, though, I don't think that really changes the whole vocabulary problem. I'm not convinced. Is it more fair? Maybe. Another suggestion was maybe some compromise between Esperanto and Lingua de Planeta. And again, a lot of that comes down to details. I talked about this idea of speaking uphill. It's not like that with Esperanto, and I don't think it would be like that with any other well-designed Auxlang project. Somebody commented that he doesn't think that Esperanto can make people equal because there are people with different natural talent. And I think that's absolutely true, but what that misses out on is this idea of when you learn another language. I speak German fairly well, and yet to this day, in spite of countless hours that I spent working on my German, I'm constantly, when I speak with a native speaker, constantly deferring to that person's ability in that language. How do you say this? Why did I say this right? This sort of thing. It's not that way with Esperanto. It's true, I've been doing Esperanto a long time, and I've put a lot of time into that as well, and people do ask me questions, and I do give people advice on Esperanto. But when I'm speaking to another very experienced speaker, they can give me some advice, I can give them some advice, we bounce ideas off each other, and in the end, it's not, well, you're a native speaker, you know, therefore I have to listen to what you say. Neither one of them was born speaking the language. They weren't born into that language. And of course, as a side note, everybody says, but what about native Esperanto speakers? As the father of 3 native Esperanto speakers, they certainly weren't born experts either. If they want to become any kind of authority on the language, they're going to need to hit those books. I'm a native speaker of English, And people contact me all the time for help learning English. And because I'm a native, I can say, well, this is the way you say it. That's that. They ultimately have to listen to what I'm saying. I had one student who was an ESL learner. He spoke English very well. But the thing was, he worked on it every day. And he lived in the United States, and he did daily lessons with a private tutor. And that's what he had to do to become near native speaker of English. Well, I hope that's given you some more food for thought. Coming up in this series, we're going to have information on Intal. I'm going to do a video on Volapük, sort of as the precursor to Esperanto, and on Edo for what happened after Esperanto. I'm going to have a video called Better Than Esperanto, and that's the idea that people get in touch with Esperanto, they see Esperanto, and they say, oh, that's interesting, I love the idea, I could do it better. And whether they're doing that as they're learning Esperanto or as they're talking about Esperanto. Is that true? What does that mean, right? So stay tuned. Over here I have a link to the original video, which Conlang should be the next international auxiliary language, and a playlist of some other videos. And then as we go, this link here is going to be updated with a playlist of the new videos in this series. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you over there.